Blog Talk Radio, the world's largest online radio network.
Welcome back to Authors on the Air. I'm Ann White, co-host, and I'm with my sassy co-host, Pam Stack. And today we have a wonderful guest. We've both been so excited, but I am going to let Pam introduce that guest. Before I turn the microphone over to Pam, I'd like to let you know where you can find us. You can always find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Authors on the Air. And please friend us when you go there, and we love to give away books. We like to promote our authors and show them what they've written. It's a fun place to be. The other place you can find us is at our website, www.authorsontheair.com. There you'll see our blog and bookstore. Every author we have interviewed, we read their books, we blog about them, and their books are available for you to purchase if you love them. So now, without further ado, let me turn the microphone over to that sassy co-host of mine, Pam Stack. Hey, Pam, how you doing today?
Hi, and thank you for that nice introduction, and welcome to you, my smart co-host. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
So, I also want to let our listeners know that they can find our interviews now, and we are proud to say, on youtube.com for books. If you don't find us anyplace else, you can go there. We have several of our interviews are now posted on the new site for youtube.com. I want to get to the important
making prime time live, isn't it? Like prime time live.
It is.
I know. Pretty
cool.
It is.
It really is. It's so cool. You know, Ann, I have been talking about this author since you invited me to join you in Authors on the Air. And as a matter of fact, when I first started with Facebook years ago, well, not years ago, but when I first heard about this author, I was absolutely gaga over his books, but upset that I couldn't get them in here in the United States. So I wrote to this author and I said, I really want to read your books. And lo and behold, a package arrives from Scotland, autographed, from the one and only master of the thriller, Sean Black. Please, listeners and fans, welcome Sean to our show.
It's very good to be with you both.
And it's lovely to be with you, too. Lovely to be with you. Friends, Sean is coming to us live from Skype in Scotland, where he lives. Thank you so much for taking the time out to be with us today, Scott. Sorry, Sean. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm reading. That's what I'm doing. Let's talk about your...
Have you been drinking?
I have. Coffee. I have. I'm just reading Scotland in front of me. Let's talk Devil's Bounty, the fourth in your series of RyanLock books that I'm absolutely in love with. Can you tell us about Devil's Bounty, or should we go back to the beginning at lockdown?
Well, maybe it might be worth mentioning, because I know a lot of your listeners are in the United States, and you said the books weren't available in the US, and it's probably worth mentioning that what I'm doing is a little bit of the background is that I'm traditionally published in the UK by Bantam Transworld, who are part of Random House. But when I sold the first book, Lockdown, and that I was very fortunate that I sold at auction, and I had a choice of publishers, which doesn't happen very often. Bantam Transworld bought world rights in the series, but just because of the timing, I actually sold at auction in the week that Lehman Brothers went bust. When they went out with the books in the US, they couldn't find the US publisher. But what they've done since is they reverted the rights in the series to me. So now I'm kind of rolling out the books via kind of ebook on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Nook, and I'm also putting together print-on-demand versions for people in the US. So that readers over there can get hold of them. So if I don't want to plug too early, but if you're looking for the books, you can they are available.
This is an amazing story. I have not come across this story of yours. You had 4 publishers bidding for the rights to publish your first book. And as far as the book world is concerned, the book world, not entertainment in general, you were a relative unknown in the book world. How did this incredible thing happen to you? It's very unusual in this day and age when even established authors were trying to get on with established traditional publishing houses. How did you come to have 4 houses bidding for your book?
Well, I mean, the background to it was that I started out writing television, and I wrote television for about 10 years in the UK. A lot of primetime shows. I had sole credit on about 70 episodes, and so it wasn't like I was a new writer. People in publishing and media and television, they love the story of the overnight success.
Right.
And in truth, there are very, very few people that are an overnight success. When you dig a little bit deeper, you've usually found a lot of rejection. And before I broke into TV, I was probably trying to break into screenwriting for about 10 years before I got my initial break. Then did TV, got a little bit tired of it, and what happened was I became very interested. The main character in the book, or the main 2 characters in the book, RyanLock and Ty Johnson, work in high-end private security. And I just kind of around the time of Afghanistan and us going into Iraq, the Western countries invading Iraq, I became very aware of this whole kind of privatization of security. And so I think I was probably having a little bit of a midlife crisis, and rather than buy a sports car, and I don't have a secretary, so I couldn't chase my secretary, and I don't think my wife would have approved of that either. So I enrolled on a 3.5-week bodyguard training course to research a television pilot about this world. And I didn't know anything about this world at all. I'd never met anyone of these guys, these very high-end security operatives. And I wrote the TV pilot and couldn't get it commissioned. No one was interested. And I thought, well, I'd always had it in my head that I wanted to write a novel. And I thought, I've got this great material. I've discovered this world that I don't think had really been explored in any great depth. And so I sat down and I wrote the book that would become Lockdown. And after all those struggles of 10 years trying to break into TV and 10 years writing TV, I guess, and I kind of want to emphasize that in case anyone thinks, what a kind of blowhard, or, it was actually, once I'd finished the book, it was actually fairly straightforward. I had about 3 or 4 agents who wanted to represent the book. I went with an agent called Luigi Bonomi, who's a very, very good agent. He's not my agent now, but an excellent agent, very charming guy. And he just sold Matt Hilton's 5 books of Matt Hilton's Joe Hunter series for £800,000. And he offered to represent Lockdown, and he was kind of, he's a great agent. So I went with him, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Now, is it true that when you first wrote Lockdown that you threw away the first copy that you wrote?
Yeah. I wrote like an 80,000 word first draft, and around about the first 40,000 words, I kind of looked at it and I thought, ooh, this doesn't work. This is going to go. But I made the decision to finish it, and there was a couple of things to say about that. One is, every book I've written now, at the you start out, I'm sure you've heard this from so many authors. When you start out, you have this kind of idealized vision of what the book is going to be, and you think, this is going to be the best thriller ever. This is going to redefine the genre, blah, blah, blah. And then you get about halfway through and you think, I'm writing the biggest piece of rubbish. This is horrible, But the trick is, it's called a first draft for a reason. So the trick is to like just kind of tuck away that person that always tells you, you know, and I'm always suspicious of writers that, you know, every sentence they think is like pure gold delivered from the.
Right.
I never trust writers that kind of think that stuff, because, you know, I think you're never as good as you think you are when you're kind of fooling yourself, and you're never as bad as you are when you're kind of down on the manuscript. Usually the truth is kind of somewhere in the middle there. So previously I'd started a few books and maybe done 10,000 words and got discouraged, or got a nice, you know, big fat commission from TV and got distracted. But I thought, this time I'm going to finish it, because you learn how to do something by seeing it through to the end. That's how you learn. You know, that's how you learn the process. So I threw out the first draft, and I stopped writing for TV, and now I realized, oh no, we don't have very much money left. And so I wrote the second draft in like 4 months. But I knew who my characters were, and I knew what the story was at that point. So it worked out. By the way, I don't recommend it as a working method.
But it worked for you.
Well, you know, it worked because the thing is, I have to tell you, if that book hadn't have sold, that was it. I was just going to go back to writing TV. I wasn't going to write more. Yeah, you know, because I was giving it one shot. Well, I mean, I say that, you know, maybe in 5 years' time I would have come back and had another go. But I just thought, you know, and I've tried to do this with every single book. I always say I try and write the best book I'm capable of writing at the time. You know, like, you know, some people love them, some people like them, some people it's not to their taste. But the most, you know, it's a bit like an athlete. You know when they say, you know, you leave your game on the court?
Right.
I try my game on the court. I don't want to you know, finish a book and look back and think, you know, I could have, you know, I mean, I do think I could have done better. But I try and give it my best shot, because then if you give someone your best shot, you're insulated. You know, because then if someone comes along and criticizes it, well, you say, well, look, I did my best.
Okay.
You know?
Okay. Well, you know something, Sean? It seems to me you are very intimately in contact with this character. If you would, could you please tell us a little bit more? I know you spent a month in Wales and in the Czech Republic doing this close protection course and firearms training.
Yeah.
What in the world possessed you not only to do this type of thing, because I'm sure this is not like going to the local, you know, fitness club and doing boot camp, and you went also to Pelican Bay Supermax. For those listeners and fans who don't know, Pelican Bay Supermax in California is the absolute end of the line for the worst of the incarcerated. Yet Sean went to these places. When you do research, man, you do research. So tell us whatever possessed you to do this, and would you do it again?
I would do the bodyguard training course again in a heartbeat, because it was just so much fun. It was so much fun. We did 4 days on a disused airfield in England, where we learned driving skills. So you learn, you know, basically all the stuff you see in the movies, like how to fishtail someone off a road, how to run, how to ram through a roadblock of other vehicles, as opposed to crashing into a roadblock of vehicles, how to J-turn. And the way that worked was the guys who were running who were the instructors, who basically have the same background as my main character, although my main character's American. They're the guys that taught me were former members of the Royal Military Police Coast Protection Unit. And when it comes to coast protection and bodyguarding, they are the guys. You know, like the guys. Sorry, go on.
Let me just interrupt you just for a second, Sean. for you to explain to anyone who doesn't understand what close protection is, because it is a very specific type of protection. Now, the Secret Service does this, don't they?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, these guys are the kind of, I guess, the British military version of the Secret Service.
Okay.
If you notice, to digress slightly, if you look at close protection run by government departments in the UK, you know, you have like diplomatic protection, royal protection, and that's like the guy who got, you know, who was stupidly allowed someone to take pictures of Prince Harry playing strip bills. You've got those guys. The guys that taught me, I can absolutely guarantee you, if they'd been looking after Prince Harry, that situation would not have taken place. They have, you know, they're military guys, they're Royal Military Police.
In the house.
And, you know, as such, basically their job is to protect, for instance, one of my good friend of mine now. So, for instance, he did like 9 months in Sierra Leone when there was civil war in Sierra Leone, and his job was to protect the British ambassador in Sierra Leone. So they work, you know, frequently. You know, he's looked after members of the royal family. He looked after the British Secretary of State in Northern Ireland before the peace process, when things were still very, very dangerous there. So these guys who work in very, very high risk environments. And so the key to what they do is they have to be able to kind of blend into the background and allow what the person they call a principal, the person they're protecting, to go about and do their job uninterrupted. But they also have to be incredibly kind of aware of the environment. And if you know, stuff does hit the fan, you know, they need to be able to get that person out of the situation, or in extreme situations, they need to be able to. They have a wonderful phrase for it. They call it giving someone the good news, and that basically means, you know, you're going to take them out of the picture.
Now, how is this different from Pelican Bay Supermax? When you went to, I mean, you went and had this training, but you went to Pelican Bay. So can you briefly just tell us about that experience? And then I think Anne has some questions she wants to ask you about your first book, Lockdown.
Oh, perfect. Okay. I mean, the bodyguard training was kind of was before I planned on writing the first book. And so that gave me my kind of insight into my characters and the world these guys operate in. And the reason I thought it was a TV series and then later would make a great series of books is that the people that operate in this world deal with all sorts of situations, and very often they're people you'll go to in the private sector when the police can't help you. You know, in the third book, Gridlock, there's an adult film actress who's been threatened. And, you know, the LAPD, and my brother-in-law is lieutenant in the LAPD. You know, and the LAPD don't offer those kind of, you know, that kind of close protection service to private individuals. So if you're in a situation, that's who you turn to. So that was the bodyguard training. Pelican Bay came in because the second book is set in Pelican Bay, and the main character goes undercover to protect a prisoner who's about to turn federal witness against some of his fellow Aryan Brotherhood gang members. And I just wanted to go because I just kind of like to get under the skin of a place. You know, you can read books and you can watch documentaries, but there's nothing like the experience of stepping through those gates and stepping onto the yard at Pelican Bay to really get a feel for it. And the reason for that is that I want the books to be as real to the reader as they possibly can. And also, any excuse for me to leave the house, because I spend most of my time.
That's funny. Excuse me. Anne, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Right. You know, when you were in Pelican Bay, Sean, that was for Deadlock. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was for the second book in the series.
Okay. Let's back up just to lockdown. Would you let our listeners give us the elevator description of what lockdown is? What kind of problem or challenge did RyanLock find himself in?
I actually had to think about that for a second, because anytime anyone
I'll give you a
me,
clue. Yeah.
No, I've got it. Anytime anyone asks me about it more than like one book back, I'm like, oh, what was that about? He's in lockdown. Ryan and his kind of business partner, Ty Johnson, who's a former U.S. Marine, or rather retired U.S. Marine. There's no such thing as a former U.S. Marine, retired U.S. Marine. They're looking after the CEO of a large pharmaceutical company, biotech company, that's been targeted by animal rights activists. And so they're providing private security for the CEO, and they discover there's an assassination attempt on this person at the start of the book that goes very badly wrong. It's a massacre in Midtown Manhattan, and that leads them to investigate kind of what's the real reason behind this tension between these two sets of people, and it takes them into this kind of corporate conspiracy. So it's probably actually a little bit more topical now in terms of corporate culture and corporate conspiracy than it was when I wrote it.
Yeah, no, it's very topical. In fact, I just read it recently, and I found it so. One of the things I wondered, too, with RyanLock, how did you turn out to be American?
Well, that's a really good question. So, originally, when I wrote the first draft, I wanted him to be Scottish, but Ryan didn't want to be Scottish.
Imagine that.
As soon as I don't know why. It was just one of those weird things that I started to write this character, and I noticed when I started to write the dialogue that he was American, and it was the same with Ty even more so. Just as soon as I started to write Ty, and particularly when I started to write scenes with those two characters in, those are like that's the easiest stuff for me to write. I mean, I can write. My old editor, who also was she was Tess Gerritsen's editor, Dennis Lehane's editor. I was very, very fortunate to have her for the first three books. She used to give me a kind of telling off, because she'd say, I always know when you're kind of coasting because you just write Ryan and Ty chapters, and you can, because you obviously find it so easy to write the banter and the dialogue between the two of them. So Locke just decided that he was American. It's just one of those strange things.
Sean, that brings me to a question. Since Locke was able to make this decision, when you decide what your story is, do you plot it out all the way to the end, or are you surprised with what happens as you get there? Do the characters sort of take you on the journey, or do you take them?
No, I'm kind of in the middle. I think a lot of writers, they talk about being a plotter or a pantser. Mm-hmm. Like flying by the seat of your pants. What I usually do is I start out with, I've got a broad idea. It might even only be like half a page, like beginning, middle, end. And I kind of, and very often I'll just kind of look at, I'll either think, what would be, a lot of the books have started out, especially Deadlock and Deadlock in particular, where I thought, what would be a really, really difficult job for someone in close protection? So in Deadlock, you've got to keep, you've got 3,500 of the most dangerous inmates in America inside Pelican Bay, and one of them is going to be targeted, 3,499 of them want to kill one of them, but he won't go into protective custody. So how do you keep him alive? So very often it's like, take your characters, put them in a corner, and I think that's where a lot of thrillers kind of don't work, is if you make it too easy for your main characters. Give them just a really difficult situation, and then they have to work it out. but I generally have a broad idea of where I want to get to, but sometimes it'll change over the course of the book.
Mm-hmm. Your characters might come up with a different idea.
Yeah, and I know before we kind of, I came on air, we're discussing there's a big twist near the end of Gridlock, the third book in the series, and that really was something that kind of happened. I mean, I kind of thought about it. But it was only really, I think you just have to trust your story and trust the characters and trust your kind of creative unconscious to make the right decision when you get to that point in the book. So I do have a broad idea of the story I want to tell, but I like to, if I knew every single detail, I would be so bored that I would never finish the book.
Shauna, I want to ask you about your characters since you're speaking about them. I've often heard you say or read when you've said that Ty Johnson is as important to the story as RyanLock, that the story is about those two main characters. Does that still hold true for you? Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And after book 4, Devil's Bounty, when I get around to writing the next book in the series, it's going to be a book that's going to be more about Ty. I think Ty's going to feature more. I just love writing Ty. I mean, he's like this 6'4" African American retired Marine. He's a real bad boy. He's very unpolitically correct. I think he's got a little bit of a soft center, but he's one of those guys. I mean, I've met guys like him. I lived in America for quite a period of time. I'm naming no names, but I've certainly met guys like him. And he likes to think he's a bit of a player, and which makes it funny. I think and also they've got that. Locke and Ty have the dynamic that I have seen so much with people who are in the military, either in the in the British military or the American military, that because they deal with things that most of us thankfully don't have to deal with, and they see things that most of us don't have to see, they tend to have a very kind of unpolitically correct, very dark sense of humor. That a lot of people, if it was anyone else that said these things, you would get a little bit upset. But you understand that's how they get. That's how they get.
I see them as a hardcore Spencer and Hawk. A Spencer for hire and his sidekick Hawk. Except Hawk to me was a very, very interesting character. I think he was more dimensional. Let me just ask you if you've ever thought about this. If you were to turn this into a screenplay, can you visualize who you'd want as your two lead characters?
I get asked that question quite a lot.
Do you?
Well, we brought last year we brought on board, I guess, the biggest agency in Hollywood, Creative Artists Agency, came on board to try and help the other people that represent the rights to get some kind of film or potentially TV interest. And the actor we had in mind to play RyanLock was Gerard Butler, and indeed Jerry's agent read it and his manager read it and they both loved it, but we really couldn't get an answer from Gerard whether he was interested in playing the role, and I think I found out subsequently being in rehab, so that might have explained that. So yeah, I mean, it's the question I get more than any other question, I guess, because people find the books very, very visual. So I get asked a lot about the film and TV adaptation. I think he would do a good job. I think there's a few actors that would do a good job.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that people find the book very visual. When I read the books, and I've read all 4 of them, and I read them as soon as I got hold of them. I have a movie going on in my head all the time when I read your books. So I understand that completely, and yet I know that you're fond of Gerard Butler. You've mentioned him before in some of your posts, but yes, you have.
Guys, we have to try and keep each other employed.
There you go. What I like, though, and this is something that you kind of touched on about Gridlock, is there is a huge change in the character landscape in that book, and I'm very pleased that, and I hope that our listeners and your fans understand that you are not afraid to take chances with your characters, and that's really something I noticed that separates you from a lot of other authors who have serialized type books. You're not afraid to take a chance. I want to read a little bit from something I read about you, that that you are considered, and let me say this quote, that you are considered the best-selling debut author in the UK with Lockdown. So I kudos to you on that, and you've been compared to Brad Thor, Brett Battles, Lee Child especially, and Tom Kane. So for those who have not read your books, please understand how important this gentleman here we're talking to is. Before we go on to Gridlock,
could you tell my wife that?
I shall. Not that it'll do any good. We generally don't care about all that stuff, unless you're like Ann and I and we love books. It doesn't matter. We can say it all we want. She doesn't care. I do want to ask a little bit about your background, though, maybe some things that people don't know. You graduated from Oxford, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I went.
And you studied philosophy, politics, and economics. It's an interesting combination, and I can see how they interplay with things. Was your father an influence and an inspiration for not only your areas of study, but you have said that he was quite a prolific author himself. How did that play into your world?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it played into my world in a couple of ways. I mean, my dad was a remarkable man. He left school when he was 14. He was the eldest, I think, of 6. He lost a sister to tuberculosis when people were still dying from tuberculosis. He himself had tuberculosis. Left school at 14, worked as a labourer, was involved with the trade union movement in Scotland, and ended up getting a scholarship to go to Oxford, to a college called Ruskin, which mainly caters to people who come from working class backgrounds, and then went on to do his PhD and became a kind of very prolific and well-regarded academic and historian, taught history at Stirling University, and so I suppose there was a couple of things that fed in. One was, and I think this is so important for kids, I grew up in a house with books and where ideas were discussed. And I think that's the greatest gift you can give to any child. Because then it doesn't have to be books in the house, but a library card, or because then it doesn't matter who you are or what your background is. If you've got a library card or you have access to books, you have access to the world.
Yes, you do.
So that was very important. And then I guess the other thing was some of my earliest memories. My dad used to write his history books on a manual typewriter, if we can remember those days. And so I can remember waking up in the morning, and he was a very hard worker, I think, because he kind of fought his way out of poverty, and he was so productive. So I can remember, as a child waking up, and what I would hear in the morning was him hammering away, and he was like me, he was like a 2-finger typist, and him beating this manual typewriter into submission. So that was what I got from, he gave me those gifts. And also I have to say, when I wrote for TV, he was constantly on at me, when you're wasting your talent writing for TV, You know, and he was right in a way, because television's very ephemeral. You know, it comes and it goes. You reach a lot of people, but yeah. So you know, so I owe him a huge debt.
And what did he think of lockdown?
I think he liked it. I mean, I'm not sure he read beyond that first book, because he wasn't particularly a big reader of fiction. But I know he was extremly, you know, he was extremely proud of me, and I dedicated that first book to my parents and to my maternal grandfather, who was injured in World War I.
Wow. Sean, in reading about you, I found that you studied film in New York, and you have a master's in fine arts from Columbia.
Yeah.
And then after that, did you teach in New Orleans by any chance?
Well, no, actually, when I was at Oxford. I think at the end of my second year at Oxford, I spent a summer and I taught for a short time in a housing project in New Orleans, and I also worked with, and I know this won't be popular with everyone who listens to this, but I worked with an organisation that opposed the death penalty in the Southern States, and my reasoning for that. Was, and I remain someone that's opposed to the death penalty, not because I believe that you know, it's not because I think that we should be soft on criminals, because I absolutely don't, and I understand the impulse behind it, but I think particularly in the southern states in the in the USA and in other parts of the world, there's been so many cases of people who've been proved to be innocent. I read about one this morning, in fact, on death row, and they tend to be African Americans, you know, and they're not represented properly. And I think there's something in our psyche where, when a terrible crime happens, especially against children, for instance, or you know, just an abominable thing happens, there tends to be a huge amount of pressure on the police to find someone, and I'm not impugning people in law enforcement. I've got many friends who work in law enforcement, but I think in those situations you find someone and you know, 2 and 2, and you try and make 2 and 2 add up. And you want people to be reassured, and I think if there was some magical way we could know without any doubt at all that someone was guilty, listen, of certain crimes, I'd strap them in the chair myself. I've got no problem with it. But the fact is, we don't have a good enough legal system, I think, to stand up. When it comes to the death penalty, but I absolutely respect the fact that, you know, many people have a different opinion.
Yeah. Let's go back to your books. Let's talk a little bit about Gridlock and the premise of that book, and then on to Devil's Bounty. And then you have a book that is kind of out of the ordinary that I think that our listeners and your fans might be interested in. So that one. So let's talk about Gridlock and Devil's Bounty. Will you give us the premise for each of those and how one flows into the next, please?
Sure. Yeah. Gridlock. The premise is very simple. It's actually not a million miles away from the movie The Bodyguard, in as much as the book opens with it's an adult film actress who is being stalked. People around her are dying. She finds a headless corpse in the trunk of her car, and so she recruits Lock and Tie to be her security. But the book kind of plays around with the idea that Lock and Tie aren't convinced that she's entirely innocent in all of this. So kind of as the bodies pile up, is she really a victim, or is there something more sinister at play? And that was really a book I wanted to write because an area I'm kind of interested, not in a, I hasten that, not in a kind of prurient sense, but I guess since I became a dad and I have a daughter, just this whole kind of world we've moved into of, everything is sexualized now, especially for young girls and young women. And so the book I read before I read Gridlock, which really informed that book, was I read Jenna Jameson's biography. And it was it absolutely fascinated me, because when you peel back that world, believe me, there is nothing sexy. There is absolutely nothing sexy about the world of pornography. And I'm not saying it's not that I'm a prude about things, or that I don't understand that people are, especially men, are kind of, visually triggered by certain things. But I wanted to kind of delve into that world and into that type of, and into a woman who had certainly been a victim. I mean, no question had been a victim, as you find almost all of the young women involved in that industry are victims of some kind.
I want to ask you one thing before you continue, Sean. Given your hands-on approach to research,
okay, go ahead.
Given your hands-on approach to research, since you were talking about the adult porn industry, did you do any research?
There are no clips of me to be found on the internet if anyone's looking.
Well, there we go. All right.
That was more secondary. I mean, I think the main thing I did for that book was I read Jenna Jameson's book. I read a few other books about people that had worked in that industry. Yeah.
That's as far as you went, huh? All clothes remained on.
Yes, exactly. And actually, there's almost no sex in the book.
No, I understand that. Yeah.
I mean, it's fine, but it's actually not something I think I have a particular. It's not something I have a particular facility, and I think I write action very well. Sex is. I don't know. A number of times you read books and there's a sex scene, and it kind of does nothing. It doesn't advance the story. It doesn't tell you anything about the character. But having said that, it's very it's very popular these days.
All right, and Devil's Bounty,
I think
which
sex
is
has
the
always
current
been kind of popular.
What?
I think sex has always been kind of popular, but anyway, let's carry on.
Well, it's popular, all right, but is it relevant to the story, I think?
I know.
Yeah, right? So then we come to the newest, I want to say, Ty and Ryan book, and that is called Devil's Bounty. Obviously, this is the first book of the 4 that does not have lock in the name.
Yes.
Tell us why, first of all.
Well, I think it was having lock in the title, Lockdown, Deadlock, Gridlock, was just a little bit of branding. So it meant that it was a kind of slightly cynical marketing ploy, in as much as people would look at the books in stores, in the UK or Germany or Russia or well, certainly in the UK, not in translation, and they'd immediately know it was part of the series. And I think we just, with Devil's Bounty, I've had so many kind of joke titles suggested to me. My daughter still thinks I should write a book set in Jamaica called Dreadlock. And I just felt we should, we just kind of, it was a good time to kind of move away. And because of the twist at the end of Gridlock, it just seemed like we wanted to take. I was taking the characters in a slightly different direction. I mean, Devil's Bounty is probably the darkest book.
It is very dark.
Of the four, and but it's a continuation as well, because Devil's Bounty essentially is about a sexual predator from a very wealthy family in Santa Barbara who is arrested for a series of fairly heinous sexual crimes against young women, and jumps bail, flees to Mexico, where he's protected by a kind of fairly murderous drug cartel. But really, it was a continuation of the themes of Gridlock, because what Devil's Bounty was about violence against women and men's reaction to violence against women. Because so often it's a topic that's it's refracted, it's somehow seen, and I don't know why this is the case, it's seen as a women's issue. And I don't think it's a women's issue. I think actually, I mean, obviously it is a women's issue, but in terms of when you look at where a lot of this kind of violence stems from, a lot of it comes from, it comes from men's attitude. How do they regard women? How do they regard...
It's a human issue. It's a human issue.
Exactly. So I wanted to... So without getting preachy, and the books aren't preachy, I like to, I'm here to tell a story and to entertain someone, but I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that kind of territory, because I think it's quite rich. I think it's quite rich.
It is a well-written, very dark but very realistic story, and I have to encourage our listeners and your fans to immediately. Let me just share that these books can be read as standalones. You do not have to read them in order, but it is an extremely well-written book, probably my favorite among all of them. And thank you for writing that, Sean. As a victim advocate and a survivor of domestic violence, I can tell you that you hit the money. You hit the nail on the head there.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. That means a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now, you have a very interesting little book called 50 Shades. And
it's called A Million Shades of Green.
50 Shades of Green. Yeah. Let's talk about that one for a minute.
Right, okay. I'm good. Right, okay. I better call my attorney into the room before we... No, it'll be fine. I've written a book called A Million Shades of Green, the real story behind 50 Shades of Grey. And I didn't set out, I wrote that and published this before 50 Shades of Grey was picked up by Random House, when that deal was just first being discussed, when 50 Shades of Grey kind of first, I think it was back in like February, March, when it started to get pressed. And I started to hear all this discussion about what was euphemistically termed the provenance of the book, the fact that it started out as fan fiction, and it just became kind of, I just thought, I didn't really know very much about fan fiction, and I started to do a little bit of digging, and I literally could not believe what I was reading. And I'm not talking, there's two things I want to be very clear about I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the content of the book, and I'm not talking about the quality of the book. I'm talking about the fact that we have had an author who wrote a piece of fan fiction called Master of the Universe, using Stephanie Meyer's characters by name, Edward and Bella, set it in an alternate universe, so there was no vampires, but took those characters and then decided that it was ethically acceptable to take that book, to do what they call in fan fiction circles, this isn't my phrase, I stress, this is what they refer to it as. They refer to it as filing off the serial number, and what that means is changing those character names and a few other details, and then publishing that book for profit. And I still can't believe it. I still can't believe that Stephanie Meyer. I have my suspicions as to why she hasn't, and I don't blame her for not getting involved. But I still can't believe that there hasn't been legal action against a civil suit against Erica Leonard, E.L. James, for the publication of that book. Because it seems, it's not plagiarism, that's the thing. Everyone says, oh, you're saying it's plagiarism. I'm not saying it's plagiarism. Clearly it's not plagiarism. But certainly there are intellectual property issues, surrounding that book. And since then it's gone beyond that. It's gone beyond anything I could say about it. And it's become this phenomenon. But I think the one thing it has pointed up, just let me say very quickly, is that, and I really have not made myself popular with certain people in publishing for saying this, but publishers, talk about being gatekeepers, and cultural guardians, and then they buy a book that was fan fiction using someone else's character, someone else's intellectual property, and they publish it, and that seems to me to undermine, this argument that publishers are gatekeepers and cultural guardians, and it just makes me sad.
So do you have much feedback on that book yet? Do you have much feedback on that book? Have you gotten comments or critiques?
Yeah, I've had some. Actually, I've had some wonderfully unpleasant personal one-star reviews, which actually have probably sold more copies of that book off the back of those one-star reviews than anything else. So I always say to authors, like, just the decision that I made and it's a very short ebook. I should also caution people. It's probably only about just under 8,000 words, but it goes into more detail than anyone, and certainly in the trade press, has bothered to do about the background to the book and the issues that have arisen from it. So yes, I've had some very positive feedback. I've had some very negative feedback. I have to say it's sold very well, which has been nice. But the main thing was I wanted to get that story out there. I don't think I did myself, in terms of publishing, I don't think I did myself any favors by talking about it or publishing the book. I'm sure there's a lot of people that wish I hadn't have done it. But I think it was important that, there's a lot of things going on in publishing at the moment, as we know. And I think it's important that, we discuss them.
Well, Sean, feedback is feedback, and none of it is bad in the long run. At least one, you get a hint on what people are saying, and two, they're reading. They're reading, and so that's a good thing, regardless.
I think it was very brave. I think you were very brave to do this. I love it.
As do I. Yeah. How many languages are your books published in right now, Sean?
Okay, well, we've just added one because we just sold. I think 2 weeks ago we did a deal with a publisher in Russia called XCOM, and they're going to publish the first 3 books. So far they've been published in German. I think that there's 2 books. The first 2 books are out in German now, and also in Dutch. And we're going to add Russian. And I'm just about to commission my own translation of Devil's Bounty into Spanish, because I think that's going to be a big market. Certainly there's a considerable Hispanic community in the United States that I think is very, very underserved in terms of the number of titles that are available for Hispanic readers in Spanish, although obviously most Hispanic people are bilingual. And so I think that should be available next year. So that's where we're up to with foreign translation.
Well, you are a busy man. You're bicontinental. I understand that you often go to LA because your wife's family is there. What do you do on your off time? I know you're a golfer, aren't you?
Yeah, I play golf. I watch soccer. I'm a big soccer fan. I have to say, apart from like the odd bodyguard course or Krav Maga weekend or day inside Pelican Bay, like most authors, you get the books done and you get the business done by having a pretty boring day-to-day life. That's the secret.
Your life doesn't sound that boring, though. You're a busy man.
But I keep busy. But the main thing is, and I know that authors listening in will understand what I'm saying here. The main thing really is just every day, whether you like it or not, whether you feel like it or not, or it's going well or not, is to show up at your desk and put the hours in. It takes a lot of work to write a book that people can read quickly.
Sean, I know that Devil's Bounty just came out, but as I'm sure most of your fans are, I am very anxious to know when the next Ty and Ryan book will be out.
So am I.
No plans, huh? You've got to write it.
No, I do have plans. I already know what the book's going to be about. I already have a topic in mind without giving too much away. I want to deal with an issue and a theme and a story that arose recently in the US that made me extremely angry, relating to not actually themes that aren't that different from Devil's Bounty, but also relating to sports, and you could probably make an educated guess as to what I'm talking about. And so that's going to be the kind of, not that story per se, but that territory is going to be that's I want to deal with that. But before I do that, I've been promising my agent for about 18 months now that I'm going to finish my new book, which is not going to feature Ryan and Ty, but is going to be in a similar vein. It's going to be a big thriller, probably much bigger than any book I've written since lockdown in terms of scope and landscape, set in the United States. So I have to write that. So I have to write that book first and kind of get it, because otherwise my various agents are not going to leave me alone until I do. And so I'm going to write that book, and then I'm going to be back to writing more Ryan and Ty.
Wonderful.
I have to tell you, this has been such an honor for me to have a chance to talk to you. And I'm thrilled that you opened up to tell us so many different things about you and your life and your father. Rest in peace. And you're just the most interesting guy, Sean, and I can't thank you enough for coming on with us. And I'm looking forward to all the books, regardless of which ones you write. So I want to say thank you. Anne?
Oh, this has just been delightful. Thank you so much. And, we'll call your wife and try to talk to her about your books.
Yeah. Let her know how important you are, okay? Yeah. We'll give her a rant and let her know.
But you have a whole fan club. So,
listen,
anyway, this has been great. You go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for such great questions.
Oh, Sean, thanks so much. And I guess hopefully Anne will get to see you on her trip. And if not, we'll talk to you again soon, okay? Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Wow.
So I can see why you're in love, Pam.
I'm in love. First of all, I love the accent. Second of all, this man knows the true meaning of being a feminist and a humanist, and you can't beat that. And the bonus is that he writes such incredibly interesting books. They're so good. And thank you for letting me be the hog today, the interview hog, which you know Sean is just about my favorite author right now, and I really appreciate you giving me that. I wish you well this weekend when you take off to go on your trip. We'll miss you.
To Ireland. I will be in the same city with Sean. Yeah.
I know you will.
We're going to try to meet up so I can get you a copy of his book, an autographed copy. So we'll see.
There you go. Thank you so much, listeners and fans of Sean Black, for being with us this Friday, and we hope that this weekend.
Pam, next Friday you have another special guest, Rachel Gibson.
Right. Next Friday. Sorry. And we hope that you've enjoyed your time with us today and with Sean Black. Remember, on the weekend, curl up with a good book and maybe a companion animal and enjoy yourself, because after all, Ann and I are going to try to answer your burning question: who are these word warriors? Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, everybody, and enjoy your weekend. We've really enjoyed this interview. We went a little longer than normal, but we were just having so much fun, we couldn't help ourselves. So take care, and we will talk to you later.
Blog Talk Radio, where millions of hosts and listeners gather.